Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name's Grant Asplund. I'm just one of the contributors to the executive thought leadership team here at CyberTalk. And with me today, I'm pretty excited. I got Mike Lopez from AccessIT Group. Mike, it's great to see you.
No, it's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Yep. So what I asked Mike to do with me is to help me talk about what are really the biggest weak points within a cloud deployment. And so we thought what we'd do is we'd put together a little series of little nuggets that'll talk about what are the most common weak points that we find. But, you know, Mike, before we start that, I really think maybe what we ought to do is talk about what's different managing this thing in the cloud versus this thing on-prem. I mean, I hear all the time people say, oh, come on, it's just somebody else's computer. It's no big deal.
Yeah, I definitely remember hearing that quite a bit as cloud became more and more prevalent across enterprise environments. But I think that now that more people have shifted out into it, they're realizing really rapidly it's not. It's entirely different than on-premise. Some of the same principles. It's really different. We're seeing application structures different. We're seeing infrastructures different. Unfortunately, our IT teams are being asked to transition from on-premise to cloud engineers with sometimes little and no warning or training. You start getting into the different cloud providers, organizations that are going multi-cloud. They're different. They behave differently. They operate differently. And the way the applications are even deployed by the teams, the development teams, is different than the way it would be done on-prem. So there's a lot of different nuances that we have to take into account when we talk about our security.
It's complicated too, right? I mean, a lot of people, I think, oversimplify just because things have similar names. And there's a big, big difference when you're up in the cloud, especially, I think you'll agree, when you start to look at cloud native, right? As things move cloud native, as you start to break those components up almost, that is where it really starts to be dangerous. Now, when we look, we're going to spend a fair amount of time in this series talking about the weak points from a posture management perspective. But are there other things I should be worried about in the cloud from a security perspective?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things that take place in the cloud that we're not used to dealing with on-premise. You touched on a little bit when we talked about native services. You're talking about, serverless applications that run now. What's happening there? What are the vulnerabilities in that particular runtime environment? We're dealing now with stolen credentials and elevated privileges, things that touch base that we're not necessarily used to dealing with on-premise. Our storage is different. It's not in our data center anymore. There's different ways to get to it. There's different ways to encrypt it, and we have to behave. Now we've got the ability for east-west traffic to be inspected, understanding what's happening in our data center much easier than we did in a true data center environment on premise. And then being able to segment our workloads really works. Containers is always a topic of conversation. Organizations are rapidly going to containers without understanding how to secure the management planes, leaving them open and vulnerable to attack. So there's a lot of different things we still have to worry about other than just the posture management in itself.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? I remember in many ways when we made this initial move to virtualization, I'm sure you'll remember, it was so amazing, but all of a sudden there was some new things that, how do I deal with inter-VM communications? How do I deal with vMotion, right? So we couldn't let our hair down and stop doing any of the things that we'd done heretofore, but it certainly required new tools. And I think that's kind of where we get when we start talking about posture management, right? I mean, it's a key fundamental building block, certainly according to Gartner, that is absolutely instrumental. I think many have heard the stat, and then I'll have you expand on it. According to Gartner, by 2023, at least 99% of all cloud failures will be the customer's fault, which is pretty much saying 100%, because I don't know how much more you could be than 99%. But why is that? Why is it just so overwhelmingly the customer's fault?
Well, I mean, we've all heard about the shared responsibility model time and time again, but really what it comes down to is misconfiguration. It's not understanding the different layers of security that can be applied. It's not understanding the security tools that are there natively and how to actually use them. We don't have a true edge anymore. You're not sitting behind the corporate firewall and, oh, it's okay, nothing can get in, nothing can get out that we don't know about. That's not true now. We've got different egress points, different ingress points, and there's different ways to communicate. And so when we start introducing those variables, if we don't have the visibility to understand where the traffic's coming from, what it's doing, and how it's behaving, we can't protect against it. And that's one of the biggest risks that we see. Cloud security posture management obviously is a foundation point for visibility.
And it's clearly, when you look at the diagram that, so famously is published by Gartner, it's the foundation. It's the first thing that they advocate you really look for. Mm-hmm. So, I was just going to say, can it really be costly? And the headline reads, can be costly. So I don't want to sound like an idiot, but what's the problem? I mean, it seems like the complexity, is it because of the interfaces are different? There's too many. I mean, why is it that this is so difficult? And the cost, talk a little bit about how it can be so costly.
Well, I mean, obviously, we get into a breach, there's all sorts of different financial repercussions, as evidenced by the Capital One that's even on the screen. But it's continuing to be, and we're continuing to see, as you alluded to, that it's misconfigurations from the customer's responsibility. That's why we're seeing these breaches occur. But without understanding where our assets are, what they're doing, and how, we can't really defend it. And one of the big variables that we've seen coming from on-premise to cloud is some one person has access to do the network, the VM, the storage, whether it be serverless, what code's running. And it's not necessarily a network engineer who's piping the network. It's not necessarily a security engineer who's creating the security rules, but it's a DevOps team that says, hey, this should work, and we think it's good, so we're going to put it out there, not realizing, what they're dealing with, unfortunately, leaving things open.